Luke chapter 20, verses 20 through 26. Jesus is in front of his disciples and his apostles. So he's got the 12, and then beyond that, another group of disciples, and then beyond that, crowds, right? And this is Jesus's preaching of the Sermon on the Mount, which we find in Matthew 5 through 7. Luke only gives chapter 6 to it, and so Luke's account is much more truncated. It also contains some pieces that aren't in Matthew's version of this, but that's just kind of the context for this. And it begins just as Matthew's does with the Beatitudes. And so let's go ahead and jump into Luke's version of Jesus's Beatitudes. Here we go. The first half of this, which is on the left side of this, is all of the blessings, right? And on the right side today, we have all of the woes. So just kind of right at the outset, we'll just kind of point out blessings and woes. The blessed, right? You got to really go dig deep on the Old Testament and kind of understand how the word blessed has been used in the Old Testament before we get into this. And just a couple points I would make is that blessed people in the Old Testament, while there is certainly a sense in which blessing can be measured in money or children or peace or those sorts of things, ultimately in the Old Testament, blessing is upon those who love the Lord and are satisfied in Him. And we know that that's not always going to mean fair weather, right? Like David is blessed by God even when he's on the run from Saul, because although he's in a terrible situation, God preserves his life, watches over him, takes care of him, satisfies him. And that's blessing, right? So that's the first thing for us to understand. Woe, the other thing to understand about the word woe is it's not like a curse or a pronouncement of judgment. It is not that. So when Jesus says woe to you, it is not that Jesus is pronouncing a curse, which is kind of what we often think about in like Jesus having the 7 woes on the Pharisees. So that's not what's going on. Woe is more like to look at something and to have that feeling of being aghast. I think that H is in the right place. It might be wrong. Maybe gassed. Oops. Too many letters here. I don't know. It's that feeling of looking at something and being horrified. It's the feeling of looking at something and taking like a mournful pity on them because you see how foolish and how darkened they are. That's really the more of the woe, right? So it's a little different than blessing, which kind of is a pronouncement, like you are blessed, and then the woe is more of an expression, like, oh my goodness, I mourn for you rich people. I pity you rich people. That's what's going on there. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into this with that understanding. The first one is we'll just kind of recognize this first one, and the presenting issue is poor, right? Blessed are you who are poor. So you who are poor, right? That's pretty straight and cut and dry, pretty straightforward. And then in each one he gives a for, right? So first comes the statement, blessed are you who are poor. Then comes the grounding for yours is the kingdom of God. And then each of them follows the same one. So in the second one, now it's hungry. Blessed are you who hunger now. So the people who hunger now. Well, I guess the key word there is more are, but they are going to be satisfied. You will be satisfied. Up here, yours is the kingdom of God. And then the last one is these people who are sad And we might even go all the way to depressed. There's an argument to be made. But for you who, blessed are you who weep now. All right. Same exact construction, right? And then once again, for you will laugh. And there's that guarantee once again. So we have these three, and then they're paralleled on the woes, right? You have the woe to you who are rich. So once again, now the kind of the opposite of poor is rich. Instead of hungry, they are well fed. And instead of being sad, they laugh. So that's the kind of parallel here in each of these. And just like on the other side, Jesus gives his reasons, right? So we get a 4 on each side. And just like on the other side, we have guarantees. You have already received your comfort. You will go hungry. You will mourn and weep. And so yeah, that's the construction. You who are rich, you who have received your comfort, you who are well fed now. Sorry, whoops, that's the second one needs to go away. And you who laugh now. So we have this exact same construction on all of these. Okay. The questions, the interpretive questions that become important right now are what is meant by poor, hungry, weep, rich, well-fed, and laugh. And so the question we have to really ask ourselves is, is Jesus just not going to let rich people go to heaven? Or is everyone who is poor going to go to heaven, right? The kingdom of God. If only poor people go to get to the kingdom of heaven, then we should all just get rid of any money we have and go be destitute. That's just the answer, right? If only the hungry get to go to heaven, if only the hungry get to be satisfied, then we should not eat. We should just starve ourselves. And if only people who weep will laugh, then we should never laugh again. We should always do that. What is going on here? How do we make sense of this? Is God really, picking who gets to go to heaven by their financial situation? The answer, of course, is no, right? So what does Jesus mean by this? And I think the first thing we're going to have to recognize is just this principle for the Beatitudes is this is about spiritual states more than physical ones. The poor, right, are the spiritually poor. The people who recognize their spiritual poverty, who say, God, I've got nothing. Because of my sin, I am a wretch. I've got nothing of worth in myself, and I need yours. They get to go to the kingdom of God. The people who are hungry now are those people who look at the world and all of its offerings and are not satisfied with the world. All of worldly pleasure, all of worldly power, all of worldly, they're like they're like Ecclesiastes. They've sampled the world and they say, there's nothing for me here. I'm hungry. Well, those people will be satisfied. And then the weeping, right? Represents a person who looks at the brokenness of the world and there is sadness in them. They look at the brokenness of the world and they weep for it. God says, don't worry. One day you will laugh, right? And then vice versa, the people who think themselves spiritually rich, oh man, that's too bad. You've already received your comfort, right? There is no future comfort for you to look forward to because you think you're good to go now. You're never going to turn and ask God because you think you're fine. So this is kind of a misguided wealth, right? Woe to you who are well fed now. You'll never go hungry. So the person who gorges upon the world and all that it offers and feels good about it, they don't feel hungry. Lord says that one day you will be. One day you will be. And for those who laugh now, those who exist in the brokenness of the world, and they're just, you kind of lackadaisically going by, living kind of blissfully ignorant of the world and its brokenness, they will mourn and they will weep, right? There's this promise there. So this is more about the spiritual than it is about anything else. The second thing that we could recognize is that there is certainly a link between the physical and the spiritual, right? When you're poor, you're kind of constantly reminded of your lack, and that will drive you often to the Lord. Now, not all poor people do that, but many do. And then when you're rich, you kind of think you're okay, and you lean on your own strength a lot. And so they're not going to be comforted by the Lord, because oftentimes rich people aren't going to seek the Lord. Now, not all, right? There are many people who become wealthy and they see the emptiness of it and they cry out to the Lord, which is a good thing, but we just want to recognize the link. Same thing with those who are hungry now. When you are hungry and you're never satisfied and you're weak and you're dependent, you cry out to God. But the opposite is true for those who are well fed now, right? It can often lead you to think, I don't really need God, and I'm pretty satisfied, I'm pretty content with the way that life is. So it's not that all well-fed people are going to go to hell. It's just recognizing that when we're physically well, we kind of ignore or become numb to our spiritual needs. Often. Not everybody, but often. And then same thing here with the weeping. Like the people who recognize the brokenness of the world, one day they're going to laugh, but there are a lot of people who walk around laughing, having a good time all the time, jovial. They kind of have a happy demeanor. We like to be around those people, right? But if that happiness and contentment actually leads to a place where you're okay with the brokenness of the world, you can just laugh about it. And I think of our world of comedians and how they can recognize the brokenness of the world, but they just turn it into jokes, into laughing. I think it's part of the way that God's actually made us, but there is a version of that is insulating us and making us numb to and even entertained by the brokenness of the world. And that is going to lead to mourning and to weeping. So there's a link between the physical and the spiritual. But the third thing that I want us to see here in the Beatitudes is that they look back and ahead. Because the thing that makes all of this true and this kind of role reversing thing is the power of the gospel. Power of the gospel. It makes the weak of the world strong. It makes the strong of the world weak. It makes the free man a slave, and it makes the slave a free man. This is this way that the gospel turns the world on its head. And you can certainly see that in each of these, that the people that we think are blessed are actually woes. The people that we think woe to are actually blessed. And it's not only a thing that anticipates the gospel and looks ahead, it is also a reality of the present. And we'll see that kind of in these other verses in this kind of latter section, where Jesus says, right here, he starts to talk about persecution. And over here, he talks about acceptance. So once again, there's this kind of opposite relationship here. But let's look at it. Blessed are you. This time he's going to say when all of these things happen. 1, people hate you. When they, 2, exclude you. When they, 3, insult you. And 4, reject your name as evil, right? So if we're just kind of highlighting those 1, 2, 3, 4 ways in which the world rejects. And then he gives us the because of the Son of Man. Blessed are you when you're hated, excluded, insulted, and rejected, not because you're a mean person, but because of the Son of Man, because you have allegiance to Jesus Christ, right? So going back up to the gospel here, he gives them a command, rejoice in that day and leap for joy. So just imagine being hated, excluded, insulted, rejected, and then literally jumping for joy and rejoice. So I just want to point out that this is kind of an absurd joy because what? How do we do this? Great is your reward in heaven. And 4, and here's where it looks back. So all of this, and I'll just kind of do it in pink. Sorry, it's a lot of pink. All of this looks forward. But then all of a sudden, this part looks back. That's how they treated their ancestors. That's how they treated the prophets. And so the prophets, for the Son of Man, for God, were hated and excluded and insulted and rejected. And they were mistreated by the people of God, right? And when we're in that situation, we can look back and remember, oh yeah, that's how they treated the prophets. That's how they treated Jesus. That's how they treated the apostles. And we are in line with them. And we should actually rejoice and leap for joy. And you think of Acts, oh man, I think it's 4 or 5, where Peter and John leave because they're the Sanhedrin. They get beat up a little bit, and they're just jumping for joy because they're counted worthy to suffer for the name. And then this relates to the other side. But woe to you when everyone speaks well of you, right? Woe to you when everyone speaks well of you, right? And again, it's not like if you're well liked that there's a problem here necessarily. Let's pay attention to the for that is how their ancestors treated the false prophets, right? And so we have kind of a comparison of two groups here. We've got the true prophets versus the false prophets, right? And so what we're caused to kind of reflect on is, why did they like the false prophets and why did they hate the true prophets? Well, they liked the false prophets because the false prophets told the kings what they wanted to hear, right? They were living for man's approval. Yet the true prophets of God were not living for the approval of men. They were living for the approval of God, right? And so if your life is always geared towards man, right, then woe to you. That's actually a pitiful thing. It's a pitiful thing when you see people who are slaves to the approval of man. And yet, how often do we see that in the church, right? How often do we see Christians who are, people who claim to be Christians at least, who are slaves to the opinions of mankind, right? And they want to be liked by everyone. They want everyone to speak well of them. In the New Testament, right, 1 Peter, we're told, to have such good conduct among the Gentiles that when they come after us, they look foolish because of our good deeds, right? So you're supposed to kind of have this testimony that looks good, and yet people are going to come after you anyway, right? Why? Because you're really living for God. And every once in a while, that creates this enmity between us and the world, because we're going to do things that upset people if we are living for the Lord. And when that happens, we just remember, that's how the answer. If I want to be well liked by everyone, the false prophets, the people who are living for man, they get treated well by everyone. I want to live for the Lord. I want to do what's right. Okay, so that gives us one more principle to kind of think about as we look at each of these, is black and white. There's no gray in any of these. It's either, and I'll just go yellow for this, it's either poor or rich. It's either hungry or well-fed. It's either weeping or laughing. It's either persecuted or well-liked. And we would love some nuance. Hey, Jesus, give me a little bit of gray in this, but he intentionally doesn't. And once again, we could ask the question, why, right? Why not? Because it forces you to be reflective. It forces you to be honest about yourself. It forces you to be honest about what you're living. It forces you to pick a side. And with God, you can't gray area your way into the kingdom of heaven. You have to be for him. Completely and totally for him, no matter what that will bring. And here he tells us what it will bring. It may bring some poverty. It may bring some hunger. It may bring some weeping. It may bring some persecution. But in the end, we are the people who laugh. We are the people who leap for joy. We are the people who are satisfied and who get to experience the kingdom of God. We are his people. And I would just encourage you, my dear brothers and sisters, to be thinking, considering, meditating on that which side are you on? And live entirely for the Lord. Live in that blessed life, not in that one that Jesus looks on and says, you poor thing, woe to you.